Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Global Fleet Conference 2020. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today in this best practice webinar that we organize together with our experts this afternoon. So first of all, let me thank all the sponsors of the Global Fleet Conference, because without their support, it was not possible to give you some exciting sessions around global fleet management. Today, we are going to deep dive into a topic that is really important. We are going to see why you should stick to your e-mobility plan and CO2 targets, even in the new normal. Indeed, fleet electrification and new mobility has been on the agenda of many multinational companies, but perhaps due to the pandemic and also, let's say, the moment to move into the new normal, this could become an issue. But we would like to see with our sponsor of this session, ALD Wheels, and also two acknowledged experts, how you can still stick to your CO2 targets and your e-mobility plan. You see the experts that we have today, and ladies and gentlemen, these are really top experts. We have the pleasure of having among us James Jin of MSD, Frans van der Hoek of Accenture, Anne Chidiac of ALD Automotive, and Sarah Sweeney of Wheels Inc. We are going to detail in this webinar how and why you should stick to your e-mobility plans. So without further ado, I would like to introduce now our first expert speaker. He is based in New Jersey, United States, and that is James Jin of pharmaceutical giant MSD. James, I hope that you are doing okay and that you can hear me.
Yes, Steven, I can hear you.
Okay, it's really nice that you can be in this webinar with the support of ALD Wheels. And we know, of course, that you are managing a global fleet. And of course, we assume that you are also having some corporate social responsibility targets that are having an impact also on your fleet strategy. So if you are ready, we would like to know a little bit more about what your fleet strategy is about and how sustainability and e-mobility fit into your category.
Okay, very well. So thank you very much, Steven, for inviting me and for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is James Jin. As Steven said, I'm based in New Jersey in the US. And today I would like to spend some time to share with you what we do in MSD to manage our target in terms of sustainability. So with that, let's go into the first slide. I would like to just give a very quick overview of our company, MSD. Many of you in the world know us by the name of MSD, but actually our company has two names. In the US and in Canada, we are known as Merck. So for people who live in North America, they associate the company with the name of Merck. But in the rest of the world, we are known as MSD. So today I'm going to stick with the name of MSD because I think most of the attendees today probably are outside North America. So I'll try to adjust using the name MSD. MSD is a major pharmaceutical company. It has presence all over the world. We have about 71,000 employees as at the end of last year. We are predominantly operating in two core areas of our business. One is in human health and the other is in animal health. And we focus in four therapeutic areas in human health. That is diabetes, infectious disease, oncology, as well as vaccines. We spend quite a bit of our operating income into the R&D side to make sure that we continue to have a robust pipeline for new drugs and vaccines. If we can go to the next slide, I am going to give you an overview of how MSD's fleet is organized. So from an organizational standpoint, Our name is called Fleet Procurement and Operations. So our company has decided to combine the two components of the fleet program, sourcing as well as operation, into one group. And I have the pleasure in leading this combined team. And our team is part of the overall global procurement organization. So we reside within global procurement. I have a core team of 5 individuals, myself plus 4 individuals who are the regional leads. So each one of them sits and leads each respective regions of the world. So North America, Latin America, Asia Pacific, as well as Europe. So we're fairly lean in terms of organization. We don't have a lot of people. However, we function through a organizational setup, which we call the Supply Strategy Council. So in the fleet area, we have a Fleet Supply Strategy Council. And that has a broader representation from people from across different functions, people that represent the key stakeholders within the fleet space. Our fleet is fairly complex. If you think about, MSD as a multinational pharmaceutical company that operates almost in all parts of the world, it's fairly complex. Our fleet size is currently around 18,000. But if you look at the different components of our fleet, it's very different from country to country and from regions to region. If I can summarize at a high level, we're very different in terms of how we fund the programs and how we acquire vehicles. Sometimes we lease, sometimes we buy. In other places, we offer allowance programs to individuals. And then the purpose of the fleet programs also are different. While 70% of our fleet is for field-based employees, primarily Salesforce people, but the 30% of the fleet program, they serve as part of the compensation purposes. So many employees within the company, they receive a company car as part of their compensation package. So earlier I mentioned, key stakeholders. So HR, compensation and benefits group, they are very important and very critical stakeholder group that represents the interest of all these employees who receive a company car as part of their package in terms of compensation. And then another major point of difference when we look across our company is in terms of how we deliver the fleet services. In most of the advanced markets, we leverage the capabilities of very capable suppliers, suppliers like ALD, suppliers like Wheels. But if you go to certain less developed markets, we have to rely on the capabilities of internal resources, in-house MSD employees. So the model of delivering service is a constant evaluation. It's a constant continuous improvement effort. We would like to streamline and make it efficient as much as we can, and we want to deploy the capabilities of our suppliers, and we hope our suppliers will go to all the locations where we have our operations. So that's a little on the complexity of our fleet. How do we manage the complexity across the whole world, across 18,000 vehicles? We try to standardize. So we have a common set of global fleet guiding principles. They serve as the foundation for all the local fleet policies, right? In each country, we have a fleet policy, and each policy can look very different from country to country, from region to region. But if we want to have an efficient governance, we have come to realize that we need to have a set of key bullet points, if you will, rather than pages after pages of a typical policy. So that's how we in MSD set up our program. With that, let's go to the next page, and I'm going to speak to our sustainability effort. So MSD as a company takes environmental sustainability very seriously. What you are looking at on the screen currently is a snapshot of our company's corporate responsibility report. And in it, it addresses 4 key areas in terms of company sustainability. It addresses energy conservation, water usage reduction, the efficient use of raw materials, as well as handling waste in compliant and responsible manners. So this is the overall portfolio approach by our company. Within that, there is a component of greenhouse gas emissions. So we do have a company-specific target on greenhouse gas, and that target is starting from the baseline year of 2015, we want to reduce our greenhouse emission by 40% when we reach the year 2025. So a 40% reduction in 10-year period of time. That emission is the total company's emission. We have a lot of facilities, a lot of plants, office buildings. We manufacture products. So there's emission from all these different real estate footprint. The majority of our company's emission comes from the sites, the manufacturing processes. Fleet is part of the total company's emission, but it's not a significant contributor. It's around 11%. So that's how MSD is positioned. That's how fleet within MSD is set up. So we are a contributor, not a major contributor, but we want to do our part to contribute to the company's overall target. So with that, let's take a look at it, specifically what we do in our fleet space. So let's go to the next slide. We work very closely with our company's EHS Council. So we have a seat at the table in terms of evaluating, designing our strategy as a company and how we in fleet contribute. So we've been working very closely with them over the years, and we have been adopting more and more efficient vehicles in terms of efficient fuel consumption, reduction in CO2. And over the years, I'm highlighting 3 key areas, like in different regions of the world, what we do in terms of improving miles per gallon, a measure that we use in North America, as well as the specific CO2 reduction over the past few years. Now, with this aggressive goal of 40% reduction, we realize that the steps that we have taken so far will not be enough to take us there by the year of 2025. So we really need something that is more significant, more of a breakthrough in nature. And we came to understand that there are different technologies that are available in the marketplace that we can take advantage of. Hybrid vehicles, EVs, mobility as a service. What we wanted to do is to set up a formal pilot program such that it enables us to have our own experience in terms of have a real world sense of how these different platforms perform for us. So over the last year, particularly in the year of 2019, we have set up multiple pilot programs all over the world to evaluate hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, as well as mobility as a service. What we have come to understand is they truly have benefits, and as a result, in certain markets, we have already included electric vehicles as well as hybrid vehicles in our car list. So as a result of the pilot programs, we have already made some quick wins. We have expanded our car list. And at the same time, we have incorporated mobility as a service into our fleet offering. So not only are we giving people the traditional assigned vehicles, that if employees wish to take something other than an assigned vehicle, they have the flexibility to do so. The purpose of all these pilot programs is really to collect MSD's own data such that we can make a rational decision based on facts and data, and that's what we are doing. So if we go to the next slide, we have come to realize that mobility has a much broader implication than purely on the fleet itself. There are different forces that are concurrently working at the same time. Talent of the future, workplace of the future, and these topics I'm sure everybody will be hearing more and more in the coming days and weeks. These forces have been combining to such a point where we as a company have realized that it is important for us to work together as a company to engage all the different key stakeholder groups, HR, compensation benefits, facilities management, travel, as well as fleet. We need to work together to develop a comprehensive company-wide ground transportation strategy. So that's something that we have been working on fairly extensively in the year of 2019. With that, let's go to the next slide. I will share, a few things that we have learned throughout the effort that we have undertaken up to this point. Number one, I think building alignment at the highest level around the policy level, that's really important. That enables all the voices to be heard, all the key stakeholders to be presented, and it enables decisions to be made more efficiently. And that's really a positive that we have gathered from all the different pilot programs that we have put in place. And secondly, leveraging the HR strategy toward future talent. So younger generation, when they come to the workforce, their expectation is a little different in terms of compensation and in terms of how they look at environmental sustainability. Most of them, or many of them, prefer something other than assigned vehicles. And in order for us to stay competitive, we need to adjust our policy. So we have done so. As I said, we've expanded our fleet offerings such that it's a combination of assigned vehicle plus mobility as a service. At the same time, we also have noticed something that we would hope that could be improved quite dramatically in a relatively short period of time. For example, EVs. I think there is concurrence that EV represents the future. It's green, zero emission, it's great, but there are certain implications that we have to consider. We don't have a lot of choices in terms of EVs. In some markets, there are no EVs. In other markets, there are EVs, but we may not necessarily have the right models that fit our fleet application. So that's something we desire for the OEMs to, develop, build, and make them commercially available for us. And then, as well as for EVs, I think charging is a challenge, and it varies from place to place. I think in Europe, probably it's more available than other parts of the world. However, if you look at it as an aggregate, still at today's level, I don't think it's quite adequate. And then from a government regulatory perspective, I think there is definitely inconsistency in terms of policies as well as incentives that are provided. And obviously, we've realized that there is going to be a cost to change. There needs to be investment. We definitely understand that, but we also understand in the next few years, there will be a lot more vehicles that will be coming, such that I think commercially, things will be much more improved than where they are in terms of price points. And throughout last year, we have been working very extensively in terms of setting our programs, collecting our data, and trying to develop a strategy as well as a roadmap. However, the pandemic came, it put a lot of things on hold. And I think we're on hold as many of you are. But we all know this is something that is temporary. We are going to go back to normal, and we look forward to that day that we can all continue to resume the projects that we have designed to execute. So with that, I'm going to pause and turn the speaking right back to Stephen, and we can leave questions and answers at the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, James Jin of MSD. Thank you for the great presentation. James, we will come back with questions at the end of this webinar. So to the audience, if you have questions for James, you can send them via the chat function in the GoToWebinar tool. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session with all the experts. So please don't hold back your questions for James Jin and the other experts. This webinar is made possible thanks to one of the most important fleet management and leasing alliances across the globe, ALD Wheels, because also they are working, of course, closely with their global fleet managers to see what kind of services they can develop to accelerate e-mobility and zero emission friendly fleet management. And so I would like to ask Sarah Sweeney of Wheels and Anne Chidiac of ALD Automotive a few questions around how do they see the transformation from, let's say, ICE fleet management to fleet electrification and new mobility. I would like to start with Sarah, if that's okay. Sarah, a first question for you is, do you see electrification gaining ground or being put on hold post-COVID-19?
Stephen, that's a great question, and I think probably at the forefront of our minds, as James mentioned, many of their projects are on hold. I think long-term impact will be minimal. I think long-term our strategies will probably not change. It probably will mean some resequencing of priorities in the short term. Maybe we narrow down our scope. Maybe we need to work within different financial constraints, but I think the long-term outlook is still where we're all going to be focusing. I think what we've all experienced during COVID has also changed maybe how businesses see their fleets, and personally how drivers see their need for a vehicle and for driving. So with less miles being driven on the road, people becoming more comfortable working remotely, working from home, I think it will help promote EVs and help drivers become more comfortable. And secondly, I also think from a macro level, many governments, sustainability has really come to the forefront with the crisis. So I think we're going to see additional incentives for organizations and even individuals to help encourage EV uptake post-pandemic.
Okay. Of course, many multinational companies are eager to, let's say, introduce e-mobility within their strategy, but sometimes they don't know exactly where to begin or what the key steps are in building that e-mobility strategy. What are for you, let's say, as a fleet management company, the key steps in setting up the right e-mobility strategy for a multinational company?
We have to spend a lot of time thinking. We need to really understand what are the objectives we're trying to achieve, how are those objectives unique within each organization. We've heard many companies put forward very aggressive, amazing goals to reach zero emissions or reduce emissions by 40%, as James said. But we really need to understand, what does that mean for your organization? What are all the different parts of the business that can contribute? From the fleet side then, and James really hit a lot of it on the head, but understanding what types of vehicles are available, how do those meet the applications that your fleet has? How will those be accepted by your workforce? Understanding your employees' acceptance of alternative powertrains, their eagerness to switch is really important, because that's going to be a big part in your rollout strategy. Who are your early champions? How are we communicating? How are we making people comfortable? I do think, as I said earlier, I think the pandemic is going to have a positive impact on it. We probably all had a bit of range anxiety thinking about driving EVs, but now knowing that you don't necessarily have to take that trip, you don't have to go to that appointment, maybe you can do it virtually, I think will help really set us on the right path for our future e-mobility solutions our customers are putting in place.
Okay, it's really great that you are positive, and of course I know that you're also available for more questions at the end of this webinar. So to the audience, if you have a question for Sarah, then please ask that question via the chat function. A few other questions now for Anne of ALD Automotive. Next to e-mobility, there is of course smart mobility, new mobility. Do you think that it can also grow within the current context of the pandemic? And if so, how and why?
Looking for alternative solution is not a new topic. I mean, we saw that with Sarah and James that EVs have been already part of the company car policy. But with the current crisis, the mindset is basically changing. People are afraid to take public transportation. So when we think about mobility, it's not just dealing with company cars, it's providing alternative solutions also for the rest of the population. And safe solutions are existing to cope with the COVID crisis sanitary recommendations. Bikes are becoming more and more popular. Think about Belgium, where 13% of the population is already using bike on the on their day-to-day basis. We know that Accenture. You cannot, and you are not willing to provide a company car on a daily basis.
Yes, I can. Very good.
You don't know how. I'm sorry, there's hearing. Yeah.
Yes, there is a sound.
There's sound behind. Yeah.
Let's try again.
Okay. So we know that companies are not willing to provide, and are not able to provide company cars to every single employee, but there's also flexible solutions that are available. I mean, B2B2E employee benefit scheme, a way of promoting safe solution and in the same time balancing company CO2 footprint. So mobility is a reality. It's already a reality for many countries, and it's a win-win situation for employers and employees. And it's not just a matter of cost. It's an opportunity to test and to show that it can be cost effective. Think about the mobility budget that has been put in place very recently in France. All the potential positive impact that you can have on your P&L, like with the taxis, the road maintenance cost that you will avoid, and also on the CSR impact, declining the traffic jam, providing alternative solutions for eco-friendly solution for your employees, increasing employee satisfaction. All in all, my advice is to test, to do it, to run survey, to validate the assumption that you have, and to adapt your mobility policy as you go.
Okay. A final question for you. ALD Wheels is, of course, a global alliance. We heard also from James that not in every country, of course, the same, let's say, strategy can be easily deployed. Can you just briefly comment how the alliance ALD Wheels can help global fleet managers with vehicles and employees across the globe in terms of setting up a mobility strategy?
Yeah. First, mobility cannot be defined as one single solution. You need to take into account market maturity, government incentive, network solution. So the key success of deploying a mobility solution or updating your car policy in a greener or to a mobility policy is to have all the stakeholders onboarded. It's just not only a matter of fleet manager anymore. HR have their own needs, CSR have their own targets, and you need to identify the mobility needs. They have to be mapped with the mobility solution that are available on the market. And we know that's not an easy task. And sometimes having a third party involved in that process makes things easier. And a global provider should be able to help you managing it centrally while taking into account all the local consideration and the local constraint that you may have. So, and of course, we are ready to help you.
Also because, of course, with ALD Wheels Alliance, you are covering quite a lot of countries across the globe. So let's say that the triangle, global, regional, and local, can be really well fitted into your strategy and that of your global fleet customers. So I would like to thank both Sarah and Anne for sharing already some thoughts around how they see with the Alliance the move to e-mobility. And of course, if you have questions for them, please use the chat function in the webinar tool. Now, as mentioned before, we have two case studies, James Jin of MSD and James based in North America. So we thought it would also be interesting to have a fleet manager that knows everything about e-mobility and is based in Europe. So we have the pleasure to have with us today Frans van der Hoek of consulting company Accenture, and they already did quite a lot in terms of greenification of their fleet strategy. And Frans, we are eager with the audience, of course, to know a little bit more about how you see the roadmap for e-mobility and new mobility within Accenture.
Okay, thank you, Stephen, for the introduction and the pleasure of sharing today. Slightly, just a few answers we are going to answer. Who is Accenture? We are focusing on fleet scope, sustainability, a very important thing within our fleet program. And of course, we're looking at the initiatives going on. So who is Accenture? As you said, I was surprised because you say we are a consulting company. Well, that's part of it. If we look at Accenture as a company, we are many things. We do strategy, consulting, digital, technology, operations. The figures we show here, it says 425,000 people. I noticed it was actually a figure from the past, almost reaching now up to 495,000 people globally, of which, of course, there's a large majority of people working services in countries like in India, in Philippines. So we see many users from Accenture as being served from Asia Pacific. Talking about Accenture also means that we need to talk about corporate responsibility, corporate citizenship. Accenture is very eager to show that we are not just making money, we are just also there to give stewardship, provide access for the best people to share their best practices all around the world. And I would definitely say that climate is one of the most top level priorities that we see, and in particular if we are going to focus on mobility aspects. So next slide, please. So where is the fleet? The fleet is in particular, I would say, in Europe, and you see the small countries with the large numbers, and we also see some bigger numbers across the world, India, Brazil, but actually 64% of the fleet is within Europe, and also same as within what James told us with MSD. There's many different stories per country. We see some big countries with no cars at all, and some small countries with a lot of cars, which is definitely also one of the packages with the benefit in kind that we provide. Looking at, of course, the number of cars, almost 15,000 in total. We work globally with 10 leasing companies. We, of course, try to maintain that within a limited number due to leverage. And we, in particular, look also nowadays at CO2 emission. We have that on board in many countries. And of course, we have a global approach there, but specifically, we also need to see what people are doing on a local basis. Yeah, next slide, please. So where did we start? And of course, we can go much further back in time. I think it doesn't make too much sense. Coming from a very classical approach by providing cars to people that were having a package of benefit, and that meant, yeah, just give them the keys to a car and have fun with it. In 2010, I think it was more an approach that we looked at a more environmental study and said, why don't we also change and provide people to have access to working from home, prevent them from traveling, prevent them from emission, and look at other means of transport by putting on top of the car the public transport availability. Funny thing to say is in 2012, I think we were one of the first ones to initiate with full electric vehicles, and we still benefit from the knowledge that we gained at that time. So looking at 2014 till today, where there was a bit more change, going into more and more environmental friendly options, but now think of environmental options into an exchange. So we're initially, we said, here is your car. We now say, here is your car, but why don't you go for a flexible budget? Or do you still need a car? If you don't need a car, go for this budget and prepare yourself to come with that money that you get from that budget to make sure that you have the right means of commuting on a daily basis. In addition, we said, if we are going to provide you a car, why don't we just also provide you an electric vehicle? And the funny thing is, in 2012, when we started, we said why don't we give everybody an electric vehicle? We said it's not possible due to the fact that there is no infrastructure. In 2020, we see that it's now not always needed to have an infrastructure because the infrastructure is coming from itself in the public area. So sometimes it's not needed to invest, but you need to make it available, and that's one thing that that I think is becoming more and more the topic within within the challenges that we see. If you go to the next slide, please. Also, same as within MSD, we have a global governance, and in particular, I think it's important to have everybody on board. If you can talk to procurement, or you go to workplace or to finance, everybody has their own saying to the story, and they also have their own vision on what needs to be happening. And by bringing these people together in this governance structure, you make sure that everybody is aligned and keeps sight on what is going to happen in the near future. Because we can start a program today as an individual, but if someone else within the company doesn't know where we are going, nothing is going to happen. Next slide, please. So sustainability, mobility into the fleet strategy. That means that you have to have the leverage. First of all, you need to make sure that everything that you need is available. Try to get as best practices within the company to make sure that everybody is aligned there and has the same objectives in where you want to go. A few years ago, we started when we became ISO 14001. We absolutely set targets within that strategy also for mobility, and we keep to that. One of the things, and that can be also on a local basis. I know from Netherlands that we aimed for a 50% reduction CO2, and it actually happened in 2020, up compared to 2014. So that was already a good setup. Even if you think about all things that are global, you always need to be able to maintain the regional or local approach. Because if you come down, top down from global and say, this is the project, this is what we're going to tell you, and this is how it works, you always meet with people say, in our country it's different, so it needs to be adjusted. And you have to bring everybody on board in making sure that this approach will work. Okay, next slide, please. So what do we do? Sustainability and EV in the fleet. That's absolutely something that we do. We have a global CO2 reduction program. We want to increase EV in all countries where it's possible. We did recently an additional RFP specifically focusing on EVs only, providing access to more brands than the ones we already had in the past, but now providing also access to the specific EV manufacturers. And of course, we need to consider local legislation. So whenever there is local legislation mentioning something about CO2, then of course we need to adjust to that. And that means that we have to pop per country on the approach what needs to happen there. Flexible work environment, that's something that we also see more and more. Instead of coming from you need to go to the office, we say, why do you need to go to the office? Stay at home if you can, and do your business from there. We're now providing also personal CO2 dashboards so that people see what the impact of them is to the environment, and that's also making somebody to be more aware about its effect to the environment. By doing that also to provide mobility awareness training to make sure that people know how they can actually reinvent themselves instead of driving, pushing the brakes, accelerating, speeding, etc. Bring back the sense to your usage of the car. Next slide. So the new mobility initiatives, and some were already mentioned there. Of course, we are looking always on a daily basis. what's happening, what can we do, and what do we need. And we want to provide more and more access to mobility modalities instead of coming from the car. A few years ago, it was very common base to say to the new hires coming from a university, say, oh, by the way, this is your key car, and have fun with it. You can join driving it as long as you want. Now we say, why do they need the car? Do they really want it? We provide them access to electric vehicles. We provide them access to other means of modality, of mobility. So go by train, go by bike. We provide e-bikes. We focus on piloting mass solutions where available. We have done some pilots recently, also in Benelux, in Netherlands, and we see also some benefit from there coming. People more aware that they don't need to drive, but they can use the train, or they can use the plane, or not the plane, but don't use the plane anymore, but use the train instead. Sorry. And we want to make sure that every year on a annual basis, we have a week or a month, we say, try to get your car leave at the home. Make it a low car diet. Make sure that everybody is aware that there is no need to travel. So next slide. And then, of course, COVID-19 came, and we saw immediately a reduction of mileage of 80%. Nobody was driving the car and everybody was working from home. Public transport immediately reduced almost to zero. And we said, okay, but we do not let that impact our strategy. We're really moving forward, and we will still provide possibilities for traveling, though keep in mind that it needs to be safe according to the legislation, of course, and the recommendations that we get from global. But for instance, we say, why always early morning meetings or late evening? Because in the end, people need to drive through the rush hour and prevent that as much as possible. Home working solutions, instead of that you just say, don't come to the office, also provide access to furniture, for instance, or monitors to make sure that everything is working well. And we still keep rolling out the EV strategy that we are implementing in many countries. We keep moving forward because we don't want to make the thing delay. Because if we delay, the government is always slow. So the government is still moving forward. If we want to move forward too, we just have to keep track and think about public charging. I see the differences in countries, Netherlands compared to Belgium. We could say we don't provide plug-in hybrids yet, but we are still moving forward and say, okay, and now you have a card, you can charge your card outside. Next slide. So what would I advise for the people in this meeting? And I think it's very common sense, and it means that you need to, at least to have everybody aligned. The governance model that we see that makes sure that everybody is heard and everybody can take and participate in the objectives that you want to receive. Incentivize implementation of EVs, provide access to a more generous approach when people want to hand in their car and want to maintain an electric vehicle instead. Possibility of charging points in premises, and that doesn't necessarily mean the offices, but it can also be at the public, personal situation at home. Facilitate public charging as best as possible, and participate in governmental studies and networking groups to make sure that everybody understands and hears what the story is about. And in particular, I would always say, keep in mind why you stick to your e-mobility, because you still have these objectives of reducing CO2 and increasing the EVs. So if you don't stick to that program, you will definitely slow down, and it will mean that you don't get there where you want to be in the end. Thank you.
Your insights I'm sure that our audience has some questions for our expert speakers. So I would like now to open up the Q&A round with the experts. So the questions, have they popped in? I need to read it. Okay, a first question, perhaps for Frans, and then after that, James. Can you tell the audience what is the percentage of, let's say, electric vehicles you already have in your fleet today? Frans, perhaps. Do you have an idea? Can you do an estimation?
It's an interesting story because in some countries, I would say it's up to, well, I think it's up to 25% almost. And in some countries, there's none. So there is still a large thing to do. Netherlands, of course, has already done a lot, piloting in the early 2010. Other countries still need to be changing. And for instance, I see Belgium that has a very difficult transfer of moving forward in this charging infrastructure, and that slows down the rollout.
Okay, thank you. James, can you elaborate a little bit on the percentage of EVs?
Yeah, I would say overall it's very low, and the ones that we have, they are primarily in the European region. So in UK, Italy, Norway, Ireland, Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, and Slovenia. We have in these countries a handful of vehicles. As I said, we were basically piloting them. So we're not fully going to a wholesale replacement at this point, because we do want to be thorough in our analysis. We know they have a benefit, but at the same time, we understand, they require additional investment. So we want to use our pilot results to really formulate a strategy such that we can present to our stakeholders to get their buy-in. Because the most important thing is we don't own the budget. The fleet department doesn't own the budget for fleet. It comes from all the business. So we have to make sure that they agree, they buy in, and in order for us to do that successfully, we need facts and data, and that's what the pilot programs is designed for.
Okay. I see that there is a question looking at my big screen around how do you define CO2 emission thresholds? Do you set targets for countries? Is there a global target? Do you work with caps? Perhaps also first the fleet managers, and then we can go to ALD Wheels to see what they can recommend to global fleet customers. Let's start with James. James, in terms of setting the thresholds, what is your preferred strategy?
So I would say we go in alignment with the corporate strategy. So the corporate strategy is 40% reduction, and we will go with 40%. And I think we'll probably set a bit higher. And the approach I think we will take is definitely going to be a prioritized approach, because it would be easier in certain markets to achieve reductions more so than in other markets. So I think we'll definitely look into more advanced, more well-developed fleet markets, such as North America, such as Europe, and such as Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. But in other parts of the world, sustainability or emission reduction, they may come in different forms. For example, in Brazil, the focus is really in using an alternative fuel source, which is ethanol. EV is not something that they are heavily promoting at the moment. So that's why I would say the approach we take will be customized based on what the local condition looks like. But in a total analysis, I think I'm confident we can reach the 40% target. In certain markets, we'll probably far exceed that target, but in other markets, we probably will be more careful.
Okay. And Frans, what is your view? What is the strategy of Accenture?
Yeah, well, I agree to what James is saying, that it's depending also per country, because there is no specific rule that works for all countries at the same time. We keep on decreasing the CO2 emissions, and the difficult stuff is that we need to identify it based on NEDC or WLTP. Whenever you have changed something, the next change is already there. What we see is that we reduce CO2 plafonds for many companies at the same time, for many countries at the same time, but not necessarily for the same limit. And we always look at what would be reasonable to still maintain a specific benefit package, because that's also to keep being attractive to the employee and to the new hires. And you cannot just drill down everything at the same time, but preferably we want to change as best as possible to full electric vehicles and try to skip the hybrid, the plug-in hybrid, because in the end that's still very difficult to have it operational. And we have seen that when we did plug-in hybrids, it's very difficult to keep control on the total amount of fuel that they are consuming.
Okay, and advice from the ALD Wheels Alliance on what was said? I don't know. Anne?
Maybe just taking a target which is, of course, challenging but achievable according to every single market. I mean, you can put a crazy CO2 target. If there's no solution available on the market to help you decreasing, it's going to be a failure, and there will be no way for you to achieve it. So a little bit of both, or both, will be a good way to reduce your CO2 footprint.
Okay, and the questions are coming in, so that is always nice. Let me look. We talked about that. Have you? Now what? Yes, to Frans perhaps. What percentage of employees take a benefit package compared to, let's say, just the company car?
Also there, depending per country, focusing on the numbers I know, in Belgium, it's almost 90% is having the company car. In Netherlands, in comparison, it's 50-50. And the change is when we provided people with a car budget, in the end, we always kept out of that the fuel component. And when we said we are going to change the fuel, because that's also something that you would have given to a person with a company car, we have seen that when we added that on top for the budget, it immediately became much more attractive for people to stay in the budget approach. The challenge that we there see is that it makes more complex to have people willing to travel, because it's always a financial incentive that they see. So the financial incentive makes it possible to get to a higher percentage, but at the same time you want to reduce travel. So fixing the cost is sometimes not always the best solution.
Okay, because the final question that I can ask is around the cost element. The question has two parts. The first one, perhaps for James. James, the question is, knowing that, let's say, the purchase price of many EVs and hybrid vehicles and so on is higher than an ICE vehicle, for sure now with oil prices very interesting. How do you, let's say, internally also motivate the choice to go for those zero emission electric vehicles from, let's say, a procurement point of view?
Okay, I think in this instance, the alignment with the corporate target in terms of environmental sustainability will definitely play a major role in terms of deciding the future for us. And in my mind, the future for us is already set there. I don't think there is a debate that we can prolong the journey. We have to, if anything, accelerate. The good thing is, at least within MSD, Fleet is at the table with the EHS Council. So we are evaluating, we are discussing, and we know there is a cost component. So there is a recognition that we have to put in additional investment in order to be greener. So I think that's a positive. The other point I think I want to reference is, for us at least, right, 2025 is where we absolutely have to hit our target. So there are still a number of years before that came. We typically replace our vehicles every 4 years. If I want to just want to make it simple and for the whole world for MSD. So we have 4 years, right, from 2021 to 2025 to each year replace roughly like 25% of the vehicles. And if at that point, we have the commitment, we have the funds, and then at the same time, we also have a lot more on the supply side, such that the price point comes down. I think I'm still very optimistic that it is really something that can be done, because we've heard from many OEMs that starting in 2021, 2022, there is going to be way more, EV models that will be available, and I'm sure that the price point will definitely come down.
Okay. The final question is for Frans and for the Alliance ALD Wheels. It's related to mobility as a service. Frans, can you just stipulate briefly what kind of mobility as a service projects you have already, let's say, piloted or launched within the countries?
Okay.
Can you mention a few?
Yeah, very well. A few. Let's stick at least with the one we did currently in Belgium, which was Skipper. Just a very easy tool to use, and people may know programs like City Mapper or Move It and such that gives you an advice on where how you get from A to B. And this was a program that we initiated in Belgium. It was an interesting way. We did it by providing this application to all the new hires that we were onboarding in the months of December, January, and February. And we just said, instead of here is your car, we said here is your Skipper app. You can just use it for the time being, and people were happy by inventing themselves coming to the office instead of having to go with the car, because there's limited, and in particular if you compare Brussels, it's very limited to get into the city. And this pilot was quite interesting. It was it needed some kickoff sessions, and then when it actually started, we noticed it was working, and people said, oh, it's working. And now they need to get used to, I don't have the Skipper app anymore, because we said we will just evaluate and we'll give it back at some other moment. But for the time being, that was absolutely, though limited, a success.
Okay. For the ALD Wheels Alliance, one of the most dominant questions that we receive is around the uncertainty and also the difficulty when introducing mobility that is linked to the fiscal schemes, so taxation and so on. So for the company car, already on a global level, each and every country has probably a different taxation scheme. If you then are going to introduce new mobility schemes, that makes the exercise with benefit in kind and so on even more difficult. What is your advice there?
I would say that to be supported by a company that has a local expert who knows their country, they are able to be in touch with fiscal authorities to get the best setup for the future. And yes, mobility could be brand new in some countries, and companies have to learn, and they can't go by themselves. They need to be supported by a network of people that know. And we are indeed not talking about OEMs anymore. We are talking of many players, and having a strong network will make the success of their mobility. If we are not able to provide them with the right information, the right total cost of mobility calculation, they will keep offering cars to their employee, and they won't reach the CSR strategy targets that have been in place. So be supported by the right people is the key.
Okay. Thank you to our expert speakers. Dear audience, we need to end the webinar here. I know that there were some more questions. You can ask these questions still to the expert speakers via our event app. I will come back on that later. There will also be a recorded version of this webinar that you can relive online in our event app. And so, like I mentioned, if you have questions that were not, unfortunately, asked during the Q&A, you can, of course, ask these questions to our experts in the event app. So they are linked in the app, and I'm sure that they are able also to provide you with the right answer. Then finally, I would like, of course, to invite you for our upcoming sessions, because we will continue with the Global Fleet Conference and bring you valuable insights about how to optimize your global fleet strategy. Thank you again to ALD Wheels for their support in organizing this webinar, and I wish you all a safe and healthy global fleet journey. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.